following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back, in case you're wondering, with George Case. We have a full panel of guests today, full panel of folks to talk to George, plus a guest. So let me get started. We have David Hubler is here.
Good morning. Good morning.
Morning, David. Alan Blumkin.
Good morning or good afternoon. It's a minute after 12.
All right. You did it the first to announce afternoon. Thank you, Al. And Ronnie Rabinovich is here.
Hello, Ralph. Hello, everybody.
How you doing, Ronnie? And
Good.
I'm going to introduce George Case to introduce our guest. In case you're wondering, with George Case III, here's the man. How are you, George?
Hey, I'm just fine, Ralph. Thank you very much. And it's going to be an interesting podcast. I met Paul Scimonelli about 2 years ago at a Washington, D.C. baseball history group meeting. And I just thought Paul would be an interesting guest. And he has a book that I think would be certainly well worth reading. And as a Washington baseball historian, and David Hubler in his book, Washington, D.C. baseball, the Nats and the Grays. David has an interest in this as well. And, Paul, if you would, talk a little bit about your book about Roy Sievers, and then we'll get into some other subjects. But I would like to, have you introduce yourself and your background and your interest in Roy Sievers and Washington baseball, if you would, please.
Thank you, George. I appreciate it greatly. Thanks for having me on, and Ralph, thanks for having me on too.
No, it's George's trip, but you are certainly welcome.
Thank you. Roy Sievers was my hero. It's just that simple. Growing up, and once I retired from the Landon School in Bethesda, Maryland, where I was teaching strings and head of the string department there. I just said, I'm going to write this book. I don't know why, but I just said I wanted to write his biography. So I actually had his number because I had worked with him a few years before when I worked for the Leukemia Society part-time. And I just said, has anyone written your biography? He said, no. I said, can I? And he said, yeah. It was really just that simple. And so I flew out to St. Louis several times. And I interviewed him, and I interviewed his daughter, Shawn, and I interviewed his brother, Bill, and I talked with many other people along the line. And I just wanted to I just felt that he was such an integral part of my growing up, my first hero worship, as it were. But, upon further review and really getting into the nitty-gritty of his life, I realized just how important he was, to this team. He completely turned the franchise around. We all know that, Bucky Harris came in and turned the franchise around in the 30s and the 40s, and we had winning teams in 33 and 24 and 25 and 33. But after that, the team just languished in the second division or near the end all the time, and Roy just came in and did as much as he could to try and pick the team up. They still languished in the bottom, but he actually sort of saved the franchise, as far as I'm concerned. He set home run records for all the years, practically all the years that he was there, and we'll talk about it later, I'm sure, but he stopped Calvin Griffith from moving the team in 1957 when he really wanted to move the team to someplace else. So just in doing research and looking into Roy Sievers, I just realized what a really great player he was and how really undervalued he was. And I still think he is very undervalued in the history of baseball with his stats, but, in particular what he did for the team. So that's kind of the background, on the book. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys got for me. I'm wonderful. I'm always happy to talk about Roy.
Well, I would like to, Paul, I would like to just, put my 2 cents in about this because, first of all, the name of your book is Roy Sievers, The Sweetest Right-Handed Swing in 1950s baseball. And, to me, that says it all. When my dad was playing with Washington, they had a reputation, and they had to be a small ball team. That's what they had to do. Left field was 407 feet. They had no right-handed power whatsoever. And then, waiting till the 50s, Roy Sievers comes along and really, as you said, transformed that ball club from a small ball club to a long ball club. Calvin had moved, I think, the left field line in at some point. I'm not sure which year, but all of a sudden, Roy starts hitting home runs, and I think he led the American League in home runs one year, and that was followed then by Jim Lemon, and he was followed by Harmon Killebrew and Bob Allison, and all of a sudden, Washington had a reputation as a long ball hitting team, and I happen to agree with you, Paul. Roy Sievers was responsible for that transformation. They, in those many, many years before that, they just had no right-handed power, and then Roy comes along and provides that, and really opened the door and changed the whole look of the ball club from what it had been. So I congratulate you on picking, such a topic and to discuss his wonderful career, because he was a great hitter. And also, you might want to touch, Paul, I'm not sure where it came from, but his nickname, I believe, was Squirrel. So you might want to talk about that, because that's certainly an unusual nickname.
Well, that was mired in controversy. I talked to a lot of people about that. It's been changed around. His brother Bill said it was because he could jump so high when he played basketball that he actually could, out-jump people who were considerably taller than him, and other people said it because he hung around the batting cages. But Roy told me, and I asked him flat out, I said, where did you get the name? And so his story was that when he was a kid in high school, he was kind of goofy. Roy always had a great sense of humor. He really had a real twinkle in his eye, a little kind of mischief. Not nothing bad or anything, not light your shoes on fire or something like that, but he was just mischievous, and he said a lot of funny things. So he would get out on the basketball court and try to loosen people up, and he'd do goofy kinds of things, and he'd say goofy kinds of things to his kids his friends in high school. And one day some guy, someone on his team said, what, Sievers, you're pretty squirrely. He says, what? He said, yeah, you're squirrely, Sievers. Yeah, squirrely Sievers. And so he said after that, it just stuck. It was a high school nickname, and, it was like, hey, Sievers, how are your nuts today, and guys would be joking on him, when they're around there, and Roy would just play it up, and he kept things loose and stuff like that. So that's how he says he got it. That's from Roy himself, but other people say it was because, he hung around like a squirrel at the batting cages a lot, which he did, and he, oversaw people. But, that's another part of his colorful name.
Yeah, Paul, Al Blumkin here. I read your book about a little bit over a year ago, and I think I met you at were you in Pittsburgh?
Yes, I was.
I think I met you there. I didn't have the book with me. Also, would have had you autograph it. And I think we talked for a couple of minutes.
Yes,
and I like to study ballpark effects. And one of the things I noticed is that I think Roy was basically responsible for Washington bringing in that left field fence.
Yeah,
because I think he had 24 home runs in his first year there in 1954.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and then the home runs that were hit in that ballpark went up. Starting in 1955, it went up because that as George can probably attest to, that ballpark was very, very rough to hit home runs, and before
Cavernous.
That,
it was huge. It was 407, like he says.
Yeah.
Roy came in there, and Griffith pulled the fences in 56 after Roy hit 24 home runs in 54, 25 home runs in 55, so they pulled it in 56.
Okay, it's after 55. Okay, I stand corrected. I also, could you discuss the trade that brought him to Washington? Because I know he broke in with the Browns. And he had a lot of problems with his shoulder. after a couple of years with the Browns, and then they traded, Washington traded Gil Cohn, who was an outfielder who was on the way down, straight up for Roy, right before 54, yeah.
Cohen had the same kind of career that Roy had in minor league ball. Cohen hit the cover off the ball and set all kinds of records where he played. And so he was supposed to be, the second coming when he came up in the late 40s at all. I think I'm not exactly sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but he came up with the Senators in the late 40s or 50s when Roy went to
late 40s, yeah.
And so Roy had, Rookie of the Year season. He set all kinds of records, but in 50 he fell into a big slump, and people got worried. In 51 he continued to slump, and he was finally sent down to San Antonio mid-season, like in June. In August is when he severely injured his shoulder. He had a complete dislocation. The ball joint fell out of the socket, and they had to wrap him up in a sling. And so he was out for the rest of the season, the rest of the year, and he tried to rehab in St. Louis with Bob Bauman, the trainer for the St. Louis Cardinals. It was with the Browns at the time, but Bauman also went to St. Louis Cardinals. And so in 52, Rogers Hornsby takes over the team, and they put him at third base in spring training. He was actually hitting pretty good in spring training, but he started to zing the ball from third base side over to first base, and he threw his shoulder out again in 52. And so that's when Bill Veeck had him do this very, very dangerous operation at Johns Hopkins University up here in Baltimore. And so he was out 52, and he was played sparingly in 53. He got into 92 games, pretty much playing part-time and pinch hitting and things like that. He hit 270, 8 home runs, and 35 RBI, but that was nowhere near what he could have done. But his shoulder, he told me, his shoulder was still hurting him, even in 53. He was really playing with one arm. He didn't have a right arm. He couldn't throw the ball overhand. He had to loop it in kind of underhand to get it to the infield. And that's when Veeck switched him over to first base so he didn't have to make that long outfield throw. So in 1954, when the Browns were sold, of course, at the end of the season of 53, and they were sold to Baltimore, there was a letter in the file from the doctor that did his operation, and who said that, Roy would never effectively throw the ball the same way again. Well, when Jimmy Dykes saw that over in Baltimore, he said, well, Sievers can't throw anymore. He's damaged good. Get rid of him. So that's where they traded him straight up for Gil Cohen. And, Roy said it was the best thing that ever happened to him because he got like a new start, a new lease on life.
Yeah.
And Cohen basically was out after a few more years with Baltimore. He didn't do very well at all over there.
He wound up on the Giants for a cup of coffee in 56. And that was the last team he played with, Gil Cohen, yeah.
That's a shame.
Hey, Paul, it's George again. I had two questions I wanted to ask you. Number one, do you know the name of the doctor that operated on Sievers at Johns Hopkins?
Yes. Hang on just a second.
Was it Dr. George Bennett?
George, thank you. I'm sorry. I was going to say George Groman, but he's my cardiologist.
No, the reason I'm asking you that, Paul, is because George Bennett also operated on my dad for the same basic reason, shoulder. That's why I'm curious if it was him. And then the other part of it was that I didn't know whether you realized it when I did. I knew it, but in 1946. Gil Cohen was playing for Washington, and Clark Griffith and Bill Veeck arranged a race between my dad and Gil Cohen at Griffith Stadium in front of General Eisenhower. And my dad beat Cohen in a race 10 seconds flat. Cohen had come up from the American Association and all with a tremendous record for speed, and Clark Griffith thought this would be a good matchup, and they did a pregame race, and Feller threw a ball through a batting device measuring the speed. It was a U.S. Army device, and my dad's race against Cohen, they drew about 20-some thousand fans into Griffith Stadium to watch. So, I had an association, reason I'm bringing it up, with both Roy Sievers and Dr. Bennett, and with Gil Cohen because of my dad.
Well, your dad beat everybody except Jesse Owens, and that was only by a footstep, from what I understand.
Yeah, well, that's right. And Clark Griffith mentioned that, he said, I never thought anybody would beat George Case in a race, and so, but he put the race together, and my dad was able to beat Cohen. But I have the picture on my wall of Eisenhower and congratulating my father with Gil Cohen looking on. So, Gil was a terrifically fast ball player who really just never, did much in the major leagues as far as hitting. And I know that trade had to be a godsend for Sievers and Washington, because, they got a tremendously productive player in Roy Sievers, and were able to, get, Cohen off the roster because he wasn't really contributing anything to the ball club. So for Roy, it had to be a wonderful experience that you've talked about, and it did certainly, transform the ball club from where it had been to what it became.
Yeah, and what I said was absolutely true. He was 2 years away from the surgery. Now, today, arthroscopic surgery and the way they do things robotically, they could have fixed that thing. He would have been out for about 6, maybe 9 months or so. So he could have rehabbed himself into shape a lot faster. Back then, there was no systematic rehab. They did what they thought they could do back in the 1950s, and it took him, 2 years. Well, it took him more than that. It took him until 1956 to really get a lot of his power back, and of course, 1957 was his big year with 42 home runs and 113 RBI. But he was finally getting his strength back by 1954, and he's hitting 407-foot home runs basically with one arm, his lead arm, his left arm. Oh. Because he's got no right hand. That's the bottom. That's the top hand that comes off, and it's your left hand that puts the power into the swing. And so, that's pretty amazing. Those are long home runs when you consider that it's only 383 in Oriole Park, down the right field line. Okay, so he was hitting home runs all. No, I take that back. It's 333 down in Oriole Park, isn't it?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, well, Paul, you know what? It is amazing. I can tell you firsthand. When I was a sophomore in college, I happened to take batting practice down at Griffith Stadium in '61 after they had taken the fence and moved it back. And I tried like hell. I was a big, strong guy. I tried like hell to put one out, and the best I could do was get it to the warning track in front of the fence in left field. And I can imagine the strength it took. And then when, later on when Mantle hit that 565-foot shot, and Killebrew and Allison and Lemon were putting them into the stands, I think they called it the beer garden at Griffith Stadium when they moved it in. But it was a long, long way. And what you're saying about Sievers with his damaged shoulder, I can just imagine the strength it took for him to hit home runs in that ballpark.
Bob Addy called it Sieversville. And then he christened it Lemonade, because Jim Lemon was actually putting them out there as well with great alacrity, So he had a couple of pet names for it, that were there. You talked about Alan. You talked about park effects.
Yeah.
Exactly. I make the same distinction in my book, in the back of the book. If you give me just a second to pull it up, all of the parks in which he played might as well have been Yellowstone National Park. When you consider that he played in the National League and he played in the Polo Grounds, it was. Where's trying to get my notes here, and find it all up. But I don't want to hold up the interview. But
hey, Paul, while you're looking for your notes, let me ask George and David. I think it was, must have been 2 years ago when we were talking about the movie Damn Yankees. And would you guys remind me? I think it was Roy Sievers that played the part of Joe Hardy.
Yeah, David, you want to touch on that?
Tab Hunter.
Tab Hunter.
Oh no!
Hunter,
of course, the actor was Tab Hunter, but I think they
he was stunt double.
He was a stunt double. Okay.
Well, they used pictures of him hitting in Briggs Stadium in Detroit and in Yankee Stadium to make it look like Tab Hunter was actually swinging. Tab Hunter would get into the box, and then they'd cut away, and they'd show a picture of Sievers hitting the home run because Tab Hunter, swung like Williams, Esther Williams.
Right. That's a good line, Paul. That's very good. That's my complaint about a lot of baseball movies, by the way. And I don't want to get into that subject, but same thing. To me, it's ludicrous. They put some of these actors, which are great actors, but they try to make them into a ball player, which they're not. So I can assume that Tab Hunter was a wonderful actor, but he was not a ball player. So to intersperse, his role in Damn Yankees in the movie with Roy hitting the ball out of the ballpark, I mean, that was right on.
I tried really hard to find someone from the Wallop family. Douglas Wallop actually taught at Maryland University. He wrote the book, the year the Yankees lost the pennant in 1954. It turned into a play in 55 and a movie in 57. So I tried to find someone, and there are several Wallops on the Eastern Shore that I found out were relatives, but I could not get a hold of anybody. Couldn't find any phone numbers or anything to try and get in touch with them. I wanted to see if Wallop used Roy Sievers as his protagonist in the book, because the thing of the book is that Joe Hardy sells his soul to the devil in order to have one good year and beat the Yankees. And 54 was, of course, Roy's first big year there, and hitting 24 home runs, which had never been done in Griffith Stadium before. And so it would be nice to find out if he was, in fact, his genesis for that particular book in the movie, because that would make it just even better.
Well, 1954 turned out to be the year the Yankees. Excuse me.
Well,
what?
This is Ron.
Did you guys ever do any scouting on Gwen Verdon at all?
What was his last year?
Roy's last year?
Yeah.
Roy's last year was 65.
Okay, so did he come to the Twins?
No, he did not. He was traded in the spring of 1960 to the Chicago White Sox because Bill Veeck had a real soft spot for him. Ever since he was the Rookie of the Year in 49, and Veeck bought the club in 51, and he's the one who basically saved Roy with that Dr. Bennett's operation. So he really had strong feelings about Roy and wanted him on the team. He wanted some more right-handed hitting. But they had Jim Rivera, and they had Minnie Minoso, and they also had Ted Kluszewski, and they also had Earl Torkelson, who was also not a shabby hitter either. And
Rivera was another hitter that with the White Sox at that time.
Oh yeah, he was. They called him Jungle Jim Rivera. After the old TV show that was on, and Roy did very, very well in there. He hit 27 homers. That was 1960 and 61, 93, 92 RBI, and 121 and 145 hits for those 2 years that he was there. So it was very productive that he was there, But then in 1961, Veeck got sick, really sick with lung problems because he was an inveterate smoker. he sold his share of the clubs to these two people, and they decided to go backwards to the go-go Sox of slap hitting and speed instead of power, and they traded him to St. Louis in 1962.
Traded him to the Phillies.
I'm sorry, excuse me, I'm Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And then he went to Philadelphia for 62, 63, and 64. Got injured in 64 and was doing a lot of bench time and was traded in 64 back to the Senators in the middle of the year with a very, very, very serious calf injury. And so he did a lot of pinch hitting in 64. And then in 65, he only played about 12 games for the Senators, and then he hung it up.
Yeah, Ronnie, the Twins got Earl Batty and Don Mincher for Roy.
Okay. Can I tell you the whole thing about it? This is really just shows how stupid Calvin Griffith was. In June of '59, when the White Sox were making a stretch run and they looked like they were going to sew it up, and they did. They went to the pennant they won the pennant that year, but not the World Series. Veeck offered Griffith Al Smith and Jim Rivera in the outfield, either Johnny Romano or Earl Batty as a catcher, and Billy Goodman or Earl Torgenson, and $250,000. So all total, and what he wanted was Sievers and J.W. Porter and a relief pitcher, just another pitcher. He wanted 3 for $4 and no money. He was giving up money. The deal was worth close to $500,000. This is 1959, gentlemen. What would that translate to in today's money? Okay.
Wow.
And so Griffith said no. He didn't want Sievers to come back and hurt his team. Yeah. Well, where were they going to go? How far up can you go from 8th place? So in the spring of '60. He needed a catcher. Griffith needed a catcher, so that's when he traded Sievers to Chicago for Earl Mincher and only $150K. So he could have had 4 people and $250 for Sievers, Porter, and a reserve pitcher to go to up there, and he turned down the offer. It's almost as bad as the Frank Robinson deal that sent him over to Baltimore in 1965. So it was a really bad.
Picking up Batty, though, ended up in '65. He was instrumental in their winning the pennant.
Oh yeah, he
was solid for a long time.
Yeah,
he had another. It was another thing of Roy coming to a new place in '54. Batty was able to get out from behind Sherm Lawler's shadow as a backup catcher, and he wasn't going to go anywhere because Lawler was a perennial all-star and a monster hitter. I mean, not a big home run hitter, but he was a hitter. He was a big RBI man, and so Batty had
Triandos came from the Yankee organization.
Exactly, and became a first-string catcher, and that's
Lawler actually played for the Yankees. They had a lot of catchers that couldn't beat out Yogi during that era.
Nobody could. Well, I mean, Yogi was left-handed, and he could use that short porch.
Which he did very effectively.
Yeah, that's the reason. That's the reason why Pete Runnels was the same way. Pete Runnels was traded to Boston, where he turned into a 2-time batting championship, where all he was doing was hitting, fly ball outs to the right field fences in Griffith Stadium, which were over 300 feet, and also had a 40-foot concrete wall. So he wasn't hitting home runs over that. You had to have a cannon or be Josh Gibson or Mickey Mantle.
Yeah, there were, and what you're talking about, Paul, and I can attest personally. I mean, that was the thing about Griffith Stadium. I mean, the left field line was huge, but the right field was manageable. But the wall, really precluded a lot of home runs, and a lot of guys like Mickey Vernon, as an example. Mickey was a line drive hitter, so he wasn't going to hit a lot of balls over the fence at the right field wall at Griffith Stadium. He was going to hit line drives, and I think Runnels was the same kind of player. They were line drive hitters, and a guy could fly out, easily at Griffith Stadium and fly balls hit to the outfield. Or if you were a line drive hitter, then you could get quite a few doubles. Matter of fact, Mickey Vernon, I think, led the league a couple of years in doubles. But that was just the way the ballpark, and as Alan had pointed out, that's the way the ballpark was laid out.
Yeah.
And David, you might want to mention too about the Grays, the Homestead Grays, and Josh Gibson, with the subject of your book, World War II era baseball. Josh Gibson had huge amount of power, and a lot of that was as a right-handed hitter. Washington did not have right-handed power, but Josh Gibson had that right-handed power with the Homestead Grays. And, David, you might want to talk about that a little bit.
Please. Well, the idea was that among all the other reasons for pushing integration, Gibson would have been a tremendous asset to Washington in those days, as you pointed out, George. But, of course, it didn't come to pass. And Gibson still is supposedly the only man to ever hit a ball fair out of Yankee Stadium.
Mm-hmm. And Mickey Mantle.
Yeah, well, he almost did it.
Twice he almost did it. Yeah.
Yeah. If that right field facade hadn't been there, that would have been out onto Jerome Avenue or someplace, or the golf course.
I found the thing that I was talking about and talking about park effects. Griffith Stadium, when they pulled the fences in, was 388 down the left field line. Comiskey Park was 362. Connie Mack Stadium was 334. Fenway was 310. Yankee Stadium was 318. Kansas City, the Athletic Stadium was 350. Tiger Stadium was 340. Memorial Stadium was 330. And Municipal Stadium was 322. So all of those stadiums afforded him, the opportunity to hit a lot of home runs on the road.
Yeah.
Which he did. And Griffith Stadium was still at 388 down the left field line, was still cavernous. It
was a long way, Paul, absolutely a long way. 388 feet. I mean, if anybody ever stood at home plate and you look out there, that, especially what you're talking about the average left field line in Major League Baseball today is 335 or whatever. You're talking another 50 feet down the line. And it's still a fair ball. I mean, no foul ball. I mean, they got to hit it out of the park to get a home run at Griffith Stadium over 388 feet down the line.
Yeah, and it's only the old parks like Wrigley and Fenway. What's the deepest part in the center field? I'm sure you can help me. Is 440 or 414 or something? I keep seeing it on TV.
It's over 400 feet, right?
It's over 400 feet in dead straightaway center field, so it's in like the Polo Grounds, which was, 454, right?
475.
Pardon me?
It was 475 in the dead center in the Polo Grounds.
Yeah.
Of course, it was 280 down the left field line, 257 down the right field line.
Yeah, well, that was that crazy, the crazy way that ballpark was laid out. I mean, the Polo Grounds, if you were a straightaway hitter, you had a huge problem. Now, if you were a pull hitter, a little bit easier. And as we all know, in the '54 World Series, I mean, when Dusty Rhodes hits a pop up and it's 257 feet and it's a home run.
Basically, all those ballparks were built on city streets. Yeah, there was a lot of confinement. Where blocks ended and blocks began. Yeah. So it was, that's why they all had, back in those days, they all had unique features.
Yeah, and you had to hit it
well. You really had to know all these ballparks, the way all these ballparks played.
With all those old ballparks, it wasn't until the great migration that happened in '57, and then after that, an expansion. And all these new stadiums, they start bringing in the lines, and they said, let's get some long ball going on here. So, I think it made it made the new ballparks made a lot of hitters in the 1960s, and of course, going on from there.
Well, the thing also with the old Yankee Stadium, this is before the renovation in the mid '70s, was 301. Down the left field line, and it would jut out to the point where it was when you got to left center, it was 457 feet.
Oh, geez.
It jutted out, and the right field was the same way. It would, be fairly short down the line, but if you went past down the line, it would jut out very, very quickly.
Well,
was having this, and when they reopened it in 1976, they also modified that quite a bit.
But it was also over 500 feet where the monuments were, which is still in fair territory.
No,
right?
it was 461 dead center.
Dead center was
right field. The interesting thing that people seem to forget is the fence was just shoulder high or less. So you had no wall there at all.
Waist
you were
high,
right you were hitting right into the stands.
It was waist
didn't
high.
Take very much.
Yeah, and
I was present for
two. By the way, I've been to Fenway. I'm sure you guys have been too.
Yeah.
Down that right field line where Williams would hit it, if you hit it right down the line, you're right there in the stands. You're sitting in some guy's lap. So it was, if you're a good hitter, you're easy to put it into the seats. But if you're a right-handed hitter, it wasn't easy in any park. As I just said, it's all over 360, 334, 310, 318. It was a poke. For a right-handed hitter, it was a poke in practically every stadium.
Crosby Field was the only one of those parks where the right field was deeper than the left field.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know about Crosby Field.
Yeah.
But it was, it just seemed that. Here's a question for all of you learned gentlemen that are on the panel. Why did they make stadiums that had such short right field porches? Was it to accommodate the big hitters like Mantle?
To a large extent, yeah. But it was also, those parks were in the confines of city blocks.
Yeah.
And I guess they laid them out originally. The real little old ones, like the Polo Grounds, have been there since 1890. They laid it out so the right field would be shorter than the left field. I don't know the reason why.
That'd be interesting.
Well, no one was really hitting home runs.
That's the way they were all. Yeah. Most of them were set up like that.
No one was really hitting home runs
until
in the 1890s. Until Ruth. And when they built Yankee Stadium, look what they did in right field.
Yeah, it was the house that Ruth built, and that was no exaggeration.
Yep.
David, continue on that, would you?
I'm sorry?
David, would you continue on what you were saying?
No, I lost my train of thought. I was just talking about Yankee Stadium.
Well, all of the stadiums, I don't think were set up in after the turn of the century to accommodate the long ball. Of course, it wasn't until Ruth came along did the long ball become very popular. It was still a bunt and steal, slap hit and run kind of game up until the time that Ruth came and started hitting really long balls in the quote unquote live ball era. But that was after 1917 when he came to when he was in Boston, and then after that, and of course, the 20s was the long ball era for him, and for many others at that time as well. They all decided to start teeing off, and Ruth and Gehrig and Lazzeri, he was a good hitter, and Bill Dickey was a good hitter. There was a lot of good hitters on that New York team, and they just. I think the people went ooh and ah over the home run, and that's when they started to rethink different stadiums and bring fences in and things of that nature to satisfy the crowds and get more people in the seats. It's like James Carville said under Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. It's always about the money. So.
Well, Paul, you're right about that. I mean, that's part of baseball, and we've talked about that on many podcasts. But it's to put fannies in the seats, and certainly, Babe Ruth and Gehrig. I mean, they put people in the seats, and other people have talked about, home run hitters. They drive Cadillacs. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast, and unfortunately today we've talked about this. It's just become almost an epidemic that the home run hitters are swinging, and little guys that shouldn't be home run hitters are swinging, and not protecting the plays. It's totally changed the character of the game. And I believe it was last week we mentioned that there's more strikeouts now in Major League Baseball than there are hits, which to me is just insane. But that's part of the new thinking about the game. Guys get 2 strikes on them, they still want to try to hit one out. So they strike out. But I wanted to go back, Paul, and talk a little bit again about Griffith Stadium, and David with you. Just the layout of Griffith Stadium, it's hard to imagine today because you just don't see it. But when you're talking that length of the ballpark and the fact that Griffith Stadium was very unusual, and Paul, you probably have seen, a lot of you have seen pictures of the center field at Griffith Stadium that was cut around a large tree and houses in center field.
Yes. The oak tree, the guy did not want to cut down.
So deep center field was actually shorter than the power alley in left and right. So, wow. I mean, that's just an unusual configuration, but that's what Griffith Stadium, when it was originally built, it was built around that large tree, and that large tree prevented the stadium from being laid out the way it should have been, where center field was deep. It actually was shallower than right and left field power alleys.
Yes, that's exactly right. The guy who owned that property did not want to sell the property, did not want to cut the tree down. They asked him to do that, and he said no, and so they built the stadium around that tree. And it is just really, really odd to see, that stadium juts out. It does the same thing in Fenway Park. There's in deep center field, and then the stands jut out back into the field and then come back in again. There's like a T square or something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, two things you're missing. Two things you're missing out on this. Number one is that in the early era, we're talking about now 1900s, very often there was no bleachers. The fans just sort of stood around. There was a roped-off area. You could hit a ball in. The other thing that was very, very relevant was the dead ball era. Nobody was hitting home runs, so It didn't matter. It didn't matter how far you put the outfield, because the game wasn't played to hit them into the stands. So you could have had 500 feet. It wouldn't have made a difference if you were playing, hit and run, slow, base-to-base baseball. That's how the game was being played in those eras. So, and in fact, even during World War II, there was the balaba ball, which was a substitute for the Major League ball at that time, and they were looking for something that could be made without the rubber core center because of the restrictions on rubber coming into the States, because the Japanese had taken over in Indonesia and islands where the rubber trees grew. So the first ball they tried was actually a dead ball. It just sank. They didn't want that by the middle of the 40s. They wanted a ball that you could hit, into the stands. And so they chose this balaba ball, which was a conglomerate mixture to play. So you really can't compare the two eras, or even the distances in the fields, especially for the older ballparks, because it didn't really matter. They were playing, base-to-base baseball.
One other thing, David, when you're mentioning, and Paul, you might have seen it. I've seen pictures, and you're talking. Well, two things. One, you're talking about the balata ball. My dad was playing at that time, and he, said, nobody liked that ball, but World War II restrictions, they had to go with it. But on the other hand, if you look back and what David is saying in the early part of the 20th century, I've seen photographs of fans ringing the outfield, standing behind ropes.
Yeah.
I mean, and what you're saying, I don't know what the ground rules were, but to me, if a ball, could go under the rope, and the ball player's got to chase it, what the heck is it? Is that a ground rule double or triple?
I think every ballpark had their own rules.
It's a ground rule. I just thought somebody just sent me a meme about the strange rules that are still on the rule books in Major League Baseball. And one of those rules is if a ball goes past the roped off outfield where people are standing, it's called a ground rule triple. And the other thing about running the bases backwards, you can't do that, or stealing second and then stealing first back again like Germany Schaefer did in 1911. Right. You can't do that anymore. Somebody sent me a whole thing about that, and hitting a ball that goes underneath that roped off area where people are standing is a ground rule triple. And
well, Paul, you know what? I've been around baseball all my life. That's the first time I ever heard of it. Never heard of a ground rule triple, but I can understand. But that's why I brought it up, because I couldn't figure out when I saw these that what happens to a ball that's hit under a rope. I mean, a rope is no kind of wall. I mean, you got to go under it, and that's curious. So that rule is still on the books.
Yep. Hang on. I'm trying to find the guy that sent it to me, a good bass player friend of mine, Sal DiRaffelli, who's a crazy Washington Senators fan. He sent me a whole bunch of these things, and that's where I got it from. So if I can find his thing here.
Hey, while you're doing that, I want to hear the voice of Ronnie Rabinovich and what you have
to
chip in, Ronnie.
Well, it's very interesting because I remember Roy Sievers. I remember having his baseball card, and I knew what a terrific ball player he was. He was really quite a hitter. And I was.
Well, what was your first major league game that you saw Roy Sievers in, and how did the passion for him become fueled?
Just like all the rest of the kids, that grew up in the 1950s. There was nothing to do in the summer times. There was really not much to do in Washington D.C. period, except the Washington Senators, and of course WWDC radio came in real loud and clear in the 1950s, and that's what I would listen to going to bed, and it was always a baseball game during the summertime. Just listening to the radio as I'm growing up, and all of a sudden you hear Roy Sievers, and he's hitting home runs, and yeah, let's go Roy, and they're actually winning some games, and like you said, Jim Lemon came along in '56, and then Bob Allison and Killebrew in '59, and they had the fierce. 1959 was the big year. They had the fearsome foursome. With Sievers, Lemon, Allison, and Killebrew, and they came in second in the league in team home runs and last in team RBI. Huh. Believe it or not, they were all hitting solo home runs because nobody else could get on base.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's an amazing stat, Paul. I never heard that before. That's incredible.
Wow, that is amazing.
They were second in the league in total home runs for the team, beaten only about by the Cleveland Indians in 1959, and then last in the league. And so, they were hitting home runs. And then I go to picture day. My dad takes me to picture day, and I've got a camera that he bought me, the typical funky brownie camera. And I get to take pictures with Roy Sievers and Jim Lemon out on the field. And, of course, then I'm awestruck. These guys are 9 feet tall, and I'm, a pudgy 4 foot tall something. and I got no hair because every Sunday your dad would cut your hair back to a buzz cut to make it, short for the summertime. And then, so here's this fat, bald, little pudgy 10-year-old out there, and that's funny. Now I'm a fat, bald 70-year-old, but that's a different story. Anyway, I'm out there with these guys, and they're huge, monstrous, towering Adonises, and you're looking up to these guys, and you're saying, wow, if I could only hit the ball like that. And so you go play your sandlike balls, and all of a sudden you're Roy Sievers. I'm Jim Lemon now. I'm going to smack the ball. I'm Mickey Mantle. I'm Yogi Berra. Yeah. And it's that the childhood adulation. Bruce Brown, who is the head of the Baltimore Sabre chapter, told me this great quote. I wish someone would be able to tell me who actually said this quote, but the golden age of baseball is the summer you turn 12 years old.
Exactly.
You're
exactly.
Absolutely right.
Paul, I was saying, did you get the same feeling when my parents took me when I was 10 to a Yankee Tiger game up in Yankee Stadium in September of 1953, and the first thing that got to me was the color of the field, the grass and everything, because everything was in black and white on TV.
Of course.
And also, the first time I actually heard Bob Shepard do the PA over the announce doing the PA at Yankee Stadium. But the greenness and the vastness,
mantle.
the greenness and the vastness of the field is something that television, black and white television couldn't even come close to capturing back then.
Well, in the movie Bull Durham, they do just exactly that. She walks into the stadium, and you see him underneath the stadium, and you walk through there, and boom, the expanse of green is something that you just can't believe, and it just looks like it goes on forever and ever. You're used to playing on your Sandlot, side street or something like that. Hard scrabble place to play, and there's nothing but green grass, and these guys are out there shagging flies, and it's like you can't believe it. I still get the same feeling whenever I go to Camden Yards or I go to Nats Park. I try to get in at least a couple of games every year, and it's still the same. It's still the same wonderment to me to come and see the field like that. And I actually did be able to get on the field one time. My younger brother Don arranged it so I was able to get on the field one time, and it's that green. It's that touching that green grass. You can't believe it. And
in the old days, they used to let us, and David might remember this. In the old days in Yankee Stadium, they used to let you walk on the warning track out to the center field bleachers. After the game
you didn't even have to walk on the. You didn't even have to walk on the warning track. You could walk right on in the outfield grass because there was exits directly out center field.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
and so
now they won't let you walk on the infield
anymore. You could stand exactly where Mantle stood or DiMaggio stood, and you got the feeling of how high the stands were. It was a wonderful. Sometimes the game was boring enough that I'd say I can't wait for the game to be over so I can go out onto the field. But I have to tell you a story because you mentioned listening to the Senators games on the radio in the summer. When my book was reviewed in the Washington Post by this dummy of a guy, first of all, he pointed out that Roy Campanella was the second black player to come up with the Dodgers, and he was actually the third. But he told the story. He was trying to downplay the fact that how bad the Senators were. Based on my book did not make them that bad. He just wanted to go along with the popular myth, and he was talking about he knew a minister or a priest who would tell him stories about how in the summertime fans would go up to the top of where the cathedral is, up to the top because it was the highest point in D.C., and they would go up there with their radios, their portable radios, and they would tune in stations from different cities to catch different ball games. Well, you could do, that was fairly. And he said there was never anyone up there listening to the Senators games. Huh. And I said, I didn't really write a rebuttal to him because you just want to forget about a review like that. You don't, like LBJ's pissing contest with the skunk. But I did point out that the reason nobody went up to the top of the hill to listen to the Senators games is because they were on local radio. You didn't have to go up to the hill.
Good point, David.
It just eluded him.
One of the great things about Pittsburgh was that you could get every other game going on except for the ones on the West Coast on the radio. It was centrally located in all because I listened to Yankee games off WHAM in Rochester, and you could pick up stations like KMOX, the one in Cincinnati, one in Detroit, in Minnesota, WCCO, and you could. It was great. So if the Pirates were on the road, because if they were home in Forbes Field, I would be there. But when they were on the road, you could pick up almost anything. It was terrific.
Right, exactly.
They're very powerful radio stations.
as a
KDKA and KMOX, they were all 50,000 watt stations.
Yeah.
And, you
they
could
were
pick up
clear channels.
Cardinals games.
They were clear channels, so you could get them at night. You could get them, and it was so funny because I'd be listening to my Dodgers, and they'd say, there's a long drive, and it's going way, way back, and then you'd hear, the radio would, static, and then after
may I tell you I'd like to tell you my story. Washington, D.C. has always had spectacular thunderstorms, and during the summer, one in particular was really, really violent. It sort of rained and poured and like all night long, but then it went through late in the evening, 8, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock or so. So I'm listening to my radio after the storm goes through, and you get the skip. I'm sure you guys know about the skip when the clouds raise really, really high after a storm. They bounce off of the clouds, and they can bounce down later. I was actually able to get, this was about 1959 or 60 or thereabouts, I was able to get a Los Angeles Dodgers game for about 15 minutes.
No kidding.
I got St. Louis Cardinals games several times, which lasted for a good 30 minutes or so. But I was actually able to hear a Los Angeles Dodgers game for about 15 minutes after that storm came through, and that was back then, 1960. That's pretty amazing. I'm listening to a game in Los Angeles that's going on right now, and you couldn't think about that. Now we've got cable TV, and it's instantaneous, and the whole thing. Right. Those were glorious days. The days of radio, I think, are what made the heroes that we loved because we made them in our minds. Ruth and DiMaggio were the kings of radio, and Mantle was the first king of TV. You could actually see Mickey hit home runs because by the mid-50s, almost every household had a TV, and so you could actually see TV for a while, and that completely made it for you. I just think that the radio broadcasters of baseball are what kept baseball alive, and are still keeping baseball alive. I still would rather listen to a ball game than actually see it on TV.
Yes, I agree. I was going to say the same thing.
I don't really like the TV announcers all that much. They're trying to put in so much color, and
right.
The guys on both the Nationals and the Orioles and the Yankees, I think they're just a great broadcast team. I really, really like the radio broadcasters better. They paint a better picture. They paint a better picture.
They do.
Hey guys, let me tell you a quick radio story. I get stationed in California in 1966 from the Air Force, and I am really missing New York radio. And I have a little radio with me, and all of a sudden I'm listening in the Travis Air Force Base, halfway between Sacramento and San Francisco. And I'm listening, and guy comes on, he goes, W something something in Pittsburgh.
Huh.
Whoa, I can get Pittsburgh on my radio from California. I'll be able to get New York if I just buy a bigger radio. So I go down to the base exchange, and I buy this big old boom box of a radio. They didn't call it boom box then. So I get back to the barracks, and I tune it in, and sure enough, the Pittsburgh station comes in loud and clear. It's Pittsburgh, California, which is about 40 miles from Memphis. And I just spent my week's pittance on a new radio, and I'm getting Pittsburgh, California, and as close as I came to back east. And all I had to do, though, I was listening to Lon Simmons and Russ Hodges. That I was blessed with that, and I got the Giants in the mid-'60s, Willie's second prime, and it was okay for me, but I remember the disappointment when I was.
You see how important it was to you,
California,
money to get a bigger radio, to get that hometown feeling, and
absolutely.
And it was the same for me growing up in Washington D.C. And my book, is an homage to that entire spirit of my growing up. And we are all of us that are here, and all of the people in Sabre and the meetings that we go to, we're all nostalgics. Everybody is in our age bracket. I don't see a lot of kids at these Sabre meetings. I see some young people, but most of them are our age brackets. And so we're remembering with fondness and with love how we grew up with all of these teams. And we're trying to equate that which we saw 50, 60 years ago for some of us to what's going on now, which is a completely and totally different ball game than what we grew up with. And I think we tend to keep those feelings because they made us the kids that we were and that we still are.
Yeah, one last story about listening to ball games. I had a colleague, this goes back about 25 years, maybe even 30 years, who was blind, but he was a great Yankees fan. And he told me what he would do is every weekend, when the Yankees play day games on the weekend, they still do, which is great, he would call his parents in New York. And they would turn on the radio, and they would put the receiver down right next to the radio, and he would listen to the whole game on the telephone. And it was true. He did this every week. I said to him, because this is a time when, long-distance calls you were charged for, and you're listening to 3 hours, a long-distance call from Washington to New York. I said, doesn't that run into money? And he had the stock answer, I'm sure. He said, yeah, but I save a lot of money on the movies.
Wow. Yeah, I found one last thing, Ralph. One last thing. Can I get in one small one? KDKA in Pittsburgh does not come into New York because New York has KDKA is 1020. New York has WINS at 1010, and they have another 50,000 watt station at 1050, which is now a Spanish station. So I found. I listened to Pirate games when I was in New York off WWVA in Wheeling, which was 1170 on the dial and not near anything. And that would that's a great station. WWVA. They had the Jamboree, WWVA Jamboree on Saturday nights, and you could hear it anywhere. I mean, Okay, I have to go because I have to get ready for the later podcast. So thank you all. Speak to you.
Hey, we'll see you, David.
Yeah, bye.
Okay, David.
Could be a good time to close it out, guys. We've had a terrific show. Paul, I hope you will come back and join our passionate crew on a regular basis. Paul. Hello. Is anybody there?
Yeah, I'm here.
I'm here.
Oh,
I'm here.
Okay. All right. Well, then, how about we go around the room and get some closing thoughts? Ronnie Rabinovich, please.
Well, I really enjoyed Paul's talking about Roy Sievers. It was very interesting. I remember Roy, of course, as a kid. Watching baseball, having his baseball cards and things like that. I never, of course, met him, but he was quite a ball player. I enjoyed it.
All right.
Great.
Alan, what would you like to close?
Excuse me. I first became of Roy from his 51 Bowman card, and he was also in that one of the Redbacks. And the Topps 1951 Redbacks. He was one of the 52 Redbacks. And there was another player they had at the time on the Browns named Dick Kokas, and they had the exact same pose on those Redbacks. And I became more aware of Roy when he was in one of the early numbers of the 52 Topps set. So that's how I became aware of him. And I know he was never on a Bowman after 1951 because he was a Topps exclusive those years. But that's how I also became aware of Gil Cohn, who I thought was Jewish. for a while before I became educated. So
different spelling, Alan.
I know that. I didn't know that when I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
But it was that's how I became aware, and I'm still keeping it up as best as I can, aware of all those guys from the early Tops and Bowman sets.
Beautiful. Love your passion, Al.
Yeah, thank you.
George, if you would be so kind as to close us out. What a terrific show.
Well, I will be. And you know what? It's been a real treat for me because I love talking Washington baseball in that era, and I agree with a lot of what Paul was saying. You know, it takes us back to our younger days. I mean, I was very fortunate because growing up in the game, I mean, I saw that green grass from a very early age, and I was on the field. I knew about the game. I love the game. I still do. But, you know, it was, a long ago era. It is a different world today. But Paul and his book and David and his book certainly, take us back to that time that we all talked about, the golden age of baseball. That's what it was for us. So I'm really happy that Paul was with us. And, Ralph, I agree. And hopefully we'll all be able to get together again and look forward to talking World War II era baseball and the 1950s and where Roy Sievers, I mean, he was a big name in baseball during that year. Maybe a lot of people today don't remember it, but Roy was a huge name in baseball, a great home run hitter, and a terrific ball player, overlooked by the time he played. He played with Mantle and those guys, but Roy Sievers was a great hitter, and I'm really happy that we had Paul on with us.
Before I ask you to tell us about your project, George, I want to add, Philadelphia was never brought up today, unless I missed it. Didn't Sievers play for Philadelphia for a few
years? He did. I think Paul touched on it briefly. Yeah, he did. Toward the end of his career, he played 2 years in Philadelphia and then was, traded or sold back to Washington for the last couple of years of his major league career. But, yeah, he played, I think it was in the early 60s, he played 2 years with the Phillies, and that's when I remember him playing for the Phillies, being in the Philadelphia area. But, of course, I knew him before that, because of his connection to Washington.
Hey, you were just playing basketball with Pickles Kennedy.
Yeah, I was playing basketball with those guys, and I was playing baseball with guys, and they would say to me, hey, talk about your old man. And I'd say, well, I'll talk about it, but I'd rather not because, he was my dad, and I never wanted to be boasting about him. But, I was fortunate because I grew up in that era and was able to play and remember, the great players from that time because I personally knew some of them. So it was, terrific childhood for me.
Absolutely. Now, tell us about your project.
Okay, well, what we talked about briefly was the green grass and the color. Alan mentioned about, all the black and white, you think about it, but that's what our DVD, it's World War II era Major League Baseball in color. Color home movie footage my dad and Mickey Vernon took during their careers, and it's called Ballfield to Battlefield and Back, from FDR to JFK. It's available right on our website. You can go to the website, www.timelessbaseball.com, and order the DVD directly off the website. So it's a look back at an earlier era with the green grass, and you can actually see the grass was green. It wasn't black and white. The entire DVD is in color.
Now tell folks how to get this said DVD.
Yeah, well, all you have to do is go to my website, www.timelessbaseball.com, and the order, you can place an order for the DVD directly from the website using PayPal. It's $29.95, including shipping, and we can get it out right away. We've sold a lot of DVDs over the years to baseball fans, and it really is a look back through the eyes of a ball player, not game footage, but what it is batting practice, pregame, spring training, train rides, all the life of a major league ball player, not necessarily in a game, but what he goes through before and after games, and part of being a Major League ball player that the fans do not see. The average fan sees a ball player performing on the field in a game. This is before games, after games, clubhouse, dugouts, spring training. It's just a real look at the way baseball used to be, and something that the fans really never see. But ball players know that that is their life, and that's what the DVD is all about.
Beautiful. What a nice way to close it out. Again, Paul, come back and join us soon. Ronnie, what a producer you're turning into be.
I had nothing to do with this one, but
well,
it's been fun.
Allegedly, you got us Paul.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Right.
Thank you, gentlemen. Alan Blumkin, always a pleasure. David's gone, and we'll be back same time next week. Next week, guys, we're going to talk about publications. It's springtime, the magazines that came out when we were kids that would fuel our passion. And I'm talking about Baseball Digest. I'm talking about Street and
Smith. Yeah.
Right. We'll talk about that
remember
next
that
week.
one.
That'll be a good topic for us. And I just want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening, everybody. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tycho, the weak link of it all. Adios, everybody. See you next week.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.